The clock is ticking, and Vladimir Putin has just 10 to 12 days to stop the war in Ukraine, or face devastating consequences. Welcome to GeoFrontline, where we break down global power shifts, strategic conflicts, and military flashpoints shaping our world. In today's episode, we dive into President Donald Trump's boldest move yet since returning to the White House, an aggressive, time-sensitive ultimatum to end the Russia-Ukraine war. With a shrinking window for diplomacy, the stakes have never been higher. Not just for Kyiv and Moscow, but for Europe, NATO, and the entire international order. Let's unpack what's happening, why this deadline matters, and what comes next if Putin refuses to stand down. At a high-stakes summit at Turnberry in Scotland, President Trump, alongside newly elected UK Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer, issued a direct warning to the Kremlin. Cease all hostilities in Ukraine within 10 to 12 days, or the US and its allies will impose sweeping secondary sanctions. These new sanctions wouldn't just target Russia. They'd go after nations and companies still buying Russian oil, including China, India, and Turkey. That's a sharp escalation in financial pressure, and it's designed to isolate Putin completely on the global stage. What makes this move so significant is that it sharply shortens the previous timeline for ceasefire negotiations. Just weeks ago, Trump's administration gave Moscow a 50-day diplomatic window. Now, the president has cut that down to less than 2 weeks, signaling that patience is running out, and the US is preparing for decisive action. Why now? There are a few key factors. First, Ukraine's counteroffensive in the east has regained momentum. With renewed US and NATO intelligence support, Kyiv has begun retaking strategic positions near Donetsk and Kharkiv. While the front lines remain fluid, Russia's war machine is bleeding resources, and its battlefield losses are growing. Second, global sentiment is shifting. After 2.5 years of brutal war, civilian casualties are in the hundreds of thousands. Over 15 million people have been displaced. Even China, a key Russian backer, has been quietly urging de-escalation behind closed doors to protect its energy and trade interests. Trump's ultimatum is designed to exploit that pressure and fracture Russia's already strained alliances. Third, the US is now repositioning itself for maximum global leverage. By applying coordinated pressure not just on Russia, but on third-party enablers, like Chinese refiners and Indian oil importers, the Trump administration is launching what some analysts are calling an economic shockwave strategy. The idea is simple: make supporting Russia too costly, too risky, and too isolating. This also sends a powerful message to Beijing, with tensions still high in the Taiwan Strait and the South China Sea. Trump's Ukraine stance is a signal that Washington won't hesitate to draw red lines and enforce them with speed and precision. What happens if Putin ignores the ultimatum? Sources close to the White House say the next steps could include cutting Russia off from remaining financial lifelines, sanctioning Chinese state banks that facilitate oil trades with Moscow, and pressuring NATO to expand intelligence operations in Belarus and Kaliningrad. There's even talk of disrupting Russian Arctic shipping routes, which are vital to Putin's Northern Economic Corridor plan. The Kremlin has already responded angrily. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov called the ultimatum an act of imperial arrogance, while Putin himself warned of a strategic response. If NATO forces increase their footprint in Ukraine's western regions, despite the bluster, Moscow is in no position for direct confrontation with NATO, especially after heavy losses in manpower, armor, and air defense systems throughout 2024 and early 2025. On the Ukrainian side, President Vladimir Zelensky welcomed Trump's stance, saying, "This is the clearest signal yet that the free world stands with Ukraine, not just in words, but in action." For Kyiv, the ultimatum could be the turning point they've waited for, a firm international deadline that might finally force Moscow to negotiate seriously. But there are risks. If Russia decides to dig in and escalate militarily instead of backing down, the conflict could enter a more dangerous phase. Some experts warn of intensified missile strikes on Kyiv and Odessa, or even cyber attacks targeting European infrastructure. There's also the wild card of Belarus, whose regime has been acting as a launchpad for Russian forces. Any destabilization there could drag NATO into a more direct posture. Still, Trump supporters argue that this kind of assertiveness was long overdue. During Biden's presidency, critics claimed the U.S. lacked clarity, delayed arms packages, and failed to deter Russia's advances. Now, with Trump back in the Oval Office, his administration is positioning itself as the driver, not the follower, of global diplomacy. Let's also consider the economic impact. If the ultimatum results in China backing away from Russian oil imports, Putin's primary cash flow could dry up within months. That could force Russia into default, causing a ripple effect through its defense sector, energy infrastructure, and public finances. And while China might protest, it faces its own economic headwinds in 2025, including slowed growth, a property crisis, and rising youth unemployment. The last thing Beijing wants is a sanctions showdown with Washington. It's worth noting that this ultimatum also tightens pressure on Iran. Tehran has been quietly supporting Russian logistics and drone production, and new U.S. intelligence suggests that Iranian components have been found in recent Russian missile debris in Ukraine. A coordinated sanctions effort could target Iran's weapons exports as part of a broader strategic containment plan. So what's the endgame? Best case scenario, the threat of secondary sanctions pushes Russia to the negotiating table. Putin agrees to a partial ceasefire, halts missile strikes, and allows for mediated talks in Istanbul or Geneva. That would be a diplomatic win for Trump and his allies, and a lifeline for Ukraine. Worst case scenario, Putin gambles on Western division, escalates militarily, and triggers a larger NATO response. That could accelerate a proxy war into a broader confrontation, one that risks pulling Europe deeper into the fray. The world now waits for Moscow's answer. 10 to 12 days. That's all that stands between peace talks and potential escalation. And as the clock runs down, one thing is clear. The United States is back in command of the global stage, and the era of mixed signals is over. Thanks for watching GeoFrontline. If you found this breakdown insightful, hit that like button, subscribe for more deep dive geopolitical analysis, and let us know in the comments, do you think Putin will cave under pressure, or is the world headed for something far worse? Stay informed, stay sharp. This is GeoFrontline.